My name is Doris Davenport. I'm a contributing correspondent for Black Muse. Black Muse is where creatives from the worlds of jazz, hip-hop, gospel, politics, sports, fashion, theater, and literature engage in the lively art of conversation. We're back with you once again with one of our interviews of a living legend. I am so honored to be here today with commercial photographer and photojournalist Howard Simmons. Howard Simmons was born on June 11, 1943 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That would also be the home of August Wilson. His mother, Lillian, was a day worker from South Carolina, while his father, Luther, was a contractor from Pennsylvania. Simmons and his older sister, Margaret, were often moving around as children. In 1961, Simmons graduated from Westinghouse High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Immediately after graduation, Simmons enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, where he played French horn with Air Force service bands until 1966. While serving, he became interested in photography and began photographing arrangements he would make with various materials from the barracks. In 1966, Simmons began working for Gateway Studios as a photo lab technician with a desire to become a commercial photographer. The following year, he compiled a portfolio and presented it to Ebony magazine, where John H. Johnson hired him as a staff photographer. With Ebony, Simmons covered Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral in Atlanta and Coretta Scott King's subsequent rally in Washington, D.C. in 1968. From Bob Black, his friend Bob Black told Simmons the Chicago Sun-Times was hiring. So Simmons joined the staff doing photojournalism until 1976. In 1973, Simmons, John White, Ovie Carter, and Bob Black created the exhibit Through the Eyes of Blackness, which displayed the everyday life of blacks. In 1976, Simmons left the paper to become a self-employed commercial photographer. He did advertisements for Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Sears, Folgers, Amoco, Kellogg's, and others, traveling as far as Zimbabwe and Paris. In 1980, Simmons shot the first cover for Black Family magazine, and in 1983, he bought a building in Chicago and turned it into what became his favorite commercial photography studio. Simmons' work is showcased on his website, howardsimmonsphotography.com, opened in 2009. Simmons is married to the beautiful Marva E. Simmons, and together they have 3 children, Robin McNiney, Tracy McGee, and Christy Edwards. Thank you so much, and welcome, Howard Simmons.
Yes, thank you. And I'll get in trouble. Munyaini. That's Robin's last name. Yes, that's Robin's last name. I don't want to
Thanks for that.
And,
thanks for being here with Black Muse.
Yes, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. Well, we talked about a lot in your bio, so we're going to spend some time unpacking all of that.
Got a lot to unpack.
We do have a lot to unpack. Well, tell our audience, how did you get interested in photography?
Well, when I was in the Air Force, in the band, which was a wonderful way to serve my country, I was home on leave, and my buddy, who, interestingly enough, introduced me to my wife, had borrowed a camera, and I saw him with the camera, and I said, "Devin, can I borrow the camera?" And so I took pictures around Pittsburgh. And I had taken pictures before, but only with cameras like the Brownie Hawkeye. And with that camera, the photographs were always kind of fuzzy, never sharp. And so the camera that he loaned me could be adjusted for focus and exposure, because with the film that you purchased, the paper would give you the different exposure and aperture to use. And so when taking pictures in sunlight, you would adjust for sunlight and adjust for cloudy days, and the focus was would be on the camera, and so you would adjust for 10 feet, 20 feet.
Do you remember the make of that
It was a folding camera with the bellows, and it was a small camera, an old camera, but it could focus and it could adjust for lighting conditions. So when I got my film back, or my prints back, wow, the pictures were sharp, and I'd never had sharp pictures before. So that was the way it started, and I fell in love. So I started shooting all over the place, and I bought more film and started shooting. So when I got back to the base, I immediately bought a little camera, Kodak Retinet, that was the camera.
Kodak Retinet?
Kodak Retinet, yes, and I got my little camera. And I was shooting everything I could find. So then I bought a better camera, and then I bought my Pentax camera. And that's the way it started, and I was off. So I read as much as I could on photography, and I shot as much as I could. And so I'm self-taught, and that's how I learned photography. And then I was shipped to the Philippines and overseas.
Now, did you do all of that self-training before you went into the Air Force, or was this while you were in the Air Force?
I was in the Air Force at that time, because when I borrowed Devin's camera, I was home on leave.
Okay, yes, yes.
So then I got shipped to the Philippines. So the advantage there was that I could purchase a camera much cheaper overseas.
The dollar was strong.
Yes. And so I bought a Pentax camera. That was my first camera. And it was a single lens reflex, which is a much better camera. So then my photographs were much better, and I shot just nonstop. And I was really in love with photography. And I would shoot in the barracks, as explained in my bio. I would take pictures while in the barracks, and I even traded my old Pentax in for a Nikon. That was the camera, got my Nikon. And so I actually got another camera. I got two Nikons, and then I bought lenses so I could have a variety of lenses from my Nikon.
Well, sometimes the lenses are more expensive than the camera.
Yeah, that's right. So I actually extended my time in the service. I could have been discharged in 4 years. I extended my time so I could buy more cameras overseas. However, when my papers came through, I was shipped to Mississippi.
What?
Biloxi, Mississippi.
Biloxi, Mississippi,
in those days,
from the Philippines.
Yes, from the Philippines. So that kind of changed my whole life there.
Yeah, I can't imagine there was an extensive camera.
Right, in Mississippi. So I extended for 9 months, and I made it through, and then I was discharged. And as you read there, I was very fortunate. I lived with my aunts, or I would live with my aunts when discharged, and my aunts gave me the real advantage as far as rent and everything goes. So I was very fortunate. I was out for 3 days. I went out looking for a job, and I got a job in 3 days at a photo studio.
Really?
So yes.
Do you remember the name of that first photo studio?
Judge Photo Studios, and it was an industrial photography studio, and I wanted to shoot, but I ended up processing film, and I copied all of the work that this photographer had done over years. He was an older gentleman. And I called it Project Copycat. And so that's all I did was copy film. And this I'll say gentleman, would go out on lunch and come back drunk or high. And he would get on me about things that I hadn't done. And I never understood that. So I told my aunts, I said, it's kind of rough down there. And my aunts told me, well, you know, you've got a place to stay, and you do not have to work for this man. So I had the advantage of being able to resign my position there. And the other advantage I had with my aunts was I in looking for a job, I could look for a job specifically in photography, so I didn't have to work for McDonald's or something else to keep myself going. So I searched for a job. I didn't get one in 3 days, but it took a little while, but my aunts let me stay there and took care of me and fed me. So I was fortunate to get a job at Gateway Studios, and Gateway Studios was an advertising studio and a full-service advertising studio because they process film there too. So I worked in the photo lab, and I wanted to shoot. And they told me, well, eventually you'll get a position as a photographer.
Now, let me ask you, at that time, this was in Chicago?
Pittsburgh.
This was Pittsburgh still?
Right.
So at that time, were you able to see other black men shooting? I mean, did you see yourself in order to set that goal, or you just knew that's what you wanted to do?
Actually, there weren't too many photographers in Pittsburgh, and the one iconic photographer was Teenie Harris, and you can look him up. And he was a news photographer. And from the time immemorial, Teenie Harris was the black photographer. But at Gateway Studios, I met Fred Kenderson. And Fred Kenderson was another iconic figure. And we stay in touch. And I read a story about him a couple weeks ago. And he's a great guy. And in talking with him, he showed me or alerted me to an article about him. And I love Fred because he was someone that I could look up to. So going back to Gateway Studios, I really wanted to be a photographer, and my love for photography was commercial photography. And again, when I was in the Air Force, I would set up little things to shoot. Sometimes, like aftershave lotion, there was one that shot with Aqua Velva, and I shot of me. So my first love was commercial photography. So while at Gateway Studios, and I was in the lab, I could print my own photographs, color photographs, even 16 by 20 color photographs for free. So I decided that I was going to get together a portfolio. So I would go out on my lunch break. I never ate at lunch. I would go around the city and shoot anything I could imagine. I think I showed you a photograph of the little shoe shine boy.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, that was shot, I think, at Penn Avenue. He would be out there all the time shining shoes, and that's that one photograph that I really love.
I love that photograph. I remember when I was younger and I'd come up and I'd see the little boys who'd want to shine the shoes of the older men. And I remember this little boy, he saw a man walking down the street, and he walked up to the man and he said, "Mister, you dropped something." And the man looked down, he said, "You dropped your shine, but I can pick it up for you."
Well, this little boy was always out shining shoes. And I would, again, on my lunch break, I would always take pictures. And when I was home, I'd go out and take pictures. I'd go back to work and make prints. I was able to print them, mount them. So I got together a portfolio, and I said, you know what? I'm going to go to Chicago and hit on Ebony magazine.
Oh, my goodness.
So naive Howard Simmons didn't even put together anything but me. And so I didn't have a resume. No resume. I didn't call.
No?
I just flew.
But you had your portfolio of work.
Yes, I had my portfolio. And I stayed with my friend who was in the Air Force with me, John Bowen, who ended up being, he and his wife ended up being our kids' godfather and godmother in later years. Walked in the door, and I'm trying to remember what I said. I walked in with my portfolio, and I don't know how I introduced myself or asked to see someone. So they sent down a writer.
I was going to say, because Mr. Johnson often does not, I worked for him for quite a few years, and he won't take walk-ins appointments.
But they sent down Alex Poinsett. You remember Alex? They sent a writer. They sent him down, and they sent him down to play Interference. So I remember I don't even know where we sat. We didn't go upstairs. This is in the old funeral home.
Oh, okay.
For those who don't know, Ebony started out in an old funeral home. So he looked at my portfolio and he was impressed. So then I got a chance to see Herb Nipson, managing editor.
Yes, good Herb.
Good old Herb.
I remember Herb.
And so he looked at my work and was impressed. And he told me, come back tomorrow and I'll let you see Mr. Johnson. This is a fairy tale.
Oh, yeah.
So I came back and I met Mr. Johnson. He looked at my portfolio and he hired me.
On the spot.
On the spot. Now, I had never worked as a professional photographer. I had never done assignments. I had never gone and, got an assignment from someone and did a job. Never. Now, in Gateway Studios, I remember doing an aerial shot for something. But as far as doing a job, a journalistic job, I never did that.
Wow.
And I never thought about that until fairly recently. I said, it took a lot of gall.
To go there?
Yeah, to go Ebony magazine, the biggest black magazine in the world. And I started out flying around the country, going shooting events and shooting in New York, California, all over the place. And I was able to do it. And again, I didn't think about that until recently. It takes a lot of nerve.
Well, one thing I'll say is Mr. Johnson knows talent. And when he finds good talent, he takes you on. But he was kind of like the plantation owners.
Yes.
Because he felt like everybody on the Johnson plantation belonged to him.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Johnson was something else to work for.
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Yes, he
but
was.
I have to be thankful that he hired me, a photographer with no background, no resume. I came in out of nowhere.
Right.
And I started working. And in 9 months, I left in 9 months because he wouldn't give me a raise. I was getting married to the young lady who's over in the corner there.
That beautiful lady.
Yes. I asked him for a raise. Mr. Johnson, I'm getting married this August. And he just said no.
No excuse, no explanation, just no.
No.
That's Mr. Johnson.
Yes, and
that
in
is
9
Mr.
months,
Johnson.
I had done 40 out-of-town assignments in 9 months.
But let me tell you how Mr. Johnson is. So now, by this time, he had sent you to Paris, is that right?
No.
Oh, he hadn't yet?
No.
You didn't go to Paris until after you left.
After I left, right.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
And that's an interesting story, too, because I had my studio on Chicago Avenue at that time. So I got a call from Mrs. Johnson. And she asked me if I could go to Paris and do a shoot. Now, at that time, she had never sent a black photographer to Paris. They would always call.
Yeah, I was going to say, because Ebony Fashion Fair travels, Paris is their annual.
Right. Well, I didn't shoot an actual fashion show. They shoot for the magazine. They shoot some of the fashions that will appear in the magazine. And so they have some of these stunning fashions as well, So it's sort of a preview that they show in the magazine. So she called and asked me about that. But what happened, she had forgotten to book the photographer in Paris. And so she had talked to Mr. Johnson about that. And he said, why not call Howard and see if he'll do it? And so they called me, and I was surprised. And so they set it all up. And that was interesting because I'm going to Paris and shooting for actually Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson.
Yes.
And that was a challenge. Mrs. Johnson, well, I have to tell you.
Yes, I do know. I have styled swimsuit issues for Mrs. Johnson for Ebony magazine.
Oh, Mrs. Johnson is another character. So,
yes.
So I'm going to another country to shoot in a studio with which I'm not familiar. So I get to Paris and...
Had you been to Paris before?
Did we go? No, I hadn't been to Paris. So when you're going to a strange studio, that's a challenge because all you're taking is your camera. So that means you have to deal with the lighting there, you have to deal with the environment there, you have to deal with everything, the setup. And so I walked in the door, and they had a light. At my studio, I had a big 4-foot by 6-foot light that I had built. And I walked in the door, and they had a light very similar to mine.
Really?
And I said, I'm home. I'm home. So what happens is they bring these exotic dresses to you to shoot.
Yes.
And they do not leave them. They drop them, wait for them. These are priceless.
Yes.
So you don't have much time. Now one thing about the studio, it was so small. It was so small that sometimes the models are behind you dressing. And they had, for the makeup, there was a little balcony. And when I say little, we're talking little. You can barely get up the steps to get to the little balcony. And that was the challenge. And the other challenge was Mrs. Johnson. I'm shooting, and Mrs. Johnson is standing beside me saying, shoot that.
Right.
Shoot that. That's Mrs. Johnson. I'm shooting.
That's right.
And so it was interesting, but the first time I shot, she was very pleased. So the second time I shot, I asked Mrs. Johnson if I could use canvas backgrounds as opposed to just a white paper.
Right.
And she said, well, if you're shooting, you're going to pay for the canvas, to rent the canvas. And I'll pay you back, but you're going to pay for it. So I shot with canvas.
Because she had to see what they would look like first.
Right.
Well, and let's look at a couple of those pictures, because I think that is beautiful. Is this the picture here?
Yeah.
From
yes,
Paris?
There it is. But she loved the photographs.
Yeah.
So from then on.
And this is one of those fabric backgrounds.
Yes, canvas. She loved the photographs.
Wow.
From then on, they did use canvas. She never paid me.
She never paid you back for the canvas.
No, never.
I'm not surprised.
No.
This is how it was.
Yes.
I'm not going to say this is how it was in general, but this is definitely how it was with Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
Put a character though, but people were afraid of her. But one thing, we got along. I joked with her.
Oh, she was great. Yeah.
Yeah, we got along. Yeah, she was a character, but we did get along.
Yeah.
And so they sent me there actually close to 10 times.
Really?
Yeah.
And that must have been just wonderful, knowing you were the first black that they sent.
Right.
And then they sent you multiple times.
Right.
What was it like to get that first call after you had already left the company, when they called you for that first job?
It was like, what? Who? You see me? And the other thing is, I'm not really a fashion photographer. And I think I produced photographs, and it's kind of delicate to say this, but I think I shot photographs better than the ones that she got before. And so they were very pleased.
Yeah.
And so it helped my portfolio too.
Well, before you worked for Johnson Publishing Company, what other publications had you worked for? None. Just
I
that
told you.
what?
I told
No
you
experience.
I walked in the door with no experience. And so the other thing too is, when I left the Sun-Times, I had never done any commercial work, and I went off on my own without having any experience in commercial work. I'm like my father.
Yeah.
My father was a character, and I found more out about my father recently than I knew. He was something else.
He was quite a character.
Oh yeah, he did things. Catch Me If You Can. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
He was in Pittsburgh. He was a physical therapist. He had a physical therapist business, and he was not a physical therapist. And other things he did. He was a healer.
Yes.
He had a healing thing.
Healing thing.
Yes.
Really?
And
did he have stones? And
I don't know if he had. That wasn't in then, stones, but
okay.
he had. I heard from my cousins that he had a healing service. He had a tent, and he had a turban.
Oh my goodness.
And here's the interesting thing. He laid hands on the woman in a wheelchair, and she got up and walked. He left the tent and everything, and he would see this woman walking down the street, and he would cross the street.
He said he better leave God
Yeah,
alone.
so he did things, and he ventured out and tried different things.
Yeah.
So as a commercial photographer, I learned a lot on my own and took chances, but I did them legitimately, not like my dad now. Yes. So I left the Sun-Times with no really experience in commercial photography. And the one person who I'm just so indebted to is Vince Colors.
Yes.
Because when I moved to Chicago to work for Ebony, again, commercial photography was my first love.
Yes.
I learned that there was a black advertising agency. Now, Vince Colors was before Burrell. A lot of people think Burrell was number one, but Vince Colors was the first.
Yes.
And I heard about a black advertising agency, Vince Colors. So I had to meet Vince Colors. So I went and I introduced myself and met Vince Colors, and he's a great guy. So after I left the Sun-Times, I immediately went to Vince Colors. And Vince gave me opportunities with his #1 clients. And he is the reason I was able to make it in commercial photography.
Really?
Because he gave me opportunities with his #1 clients, like Kellogg's, and then Amoco, which is now BPO, and Sears, and that's all because of Vince.
Wow, that's amazing. That
Yes.
is amazing.
Another person I have to give kudos to is Lowell Thompson. Lowell Thompson was an art director at Burrell, and this guy was just a wonderful guy to me. He as an art director, and he's a character too. I love Lowell.
Oh, well, you know, you have a knack for being at the right place at the right time.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think about you being asked to go to Paris, and it reminds me of a story I heard you talk about when, I mean, these guys, they had to know that you had skills other than photography. When you have a Burrell Advertising that wants a poem from Maya Angelou, and Maya Angelou is saying, well, sure, I'll write the poem, but you're gonna have to give me $1 million, something like that. And they turned around and said, well, okay, Maya, thank you very much. We've got Howard Simmons.
Well, I don't think it was quite like that, but
How
I
did it
know
happen?
they called me.
How do you get to be second to Maya Angelou to write a poem, and you're a photographer?
Well, they knew that I had some poetic skills, I suppose, but I was driving, I was down Chicago, I think it was on Michigan Avenue, and they called me, and they understood, as I understood it, Maya Angelou was to write a poem for a Sears ad on Black Women's History Month, I think it was, and Maya Angelou wanted an exorbitant amount of money for the poem. And they called me and they said, Howard, can you write a poem for a Sears ad? And I said, sure. And the poem started turning around in my head right away.
Right then and there.
Just look at you. And I can't remember the whole poem, but it was just look at you in all your womanly glory. Just look at you strutting your stuff past I wish I could remember. I can't remember the poem. And, you know, we looked to see if we could
That's
find
okay.
it.
We'll try to find it, because if we find it at the time, by the time we air this, we're going to post
Oh,
it.
I have it at home, so you'll
Okay,
get
good.
it.
We'll get it.
And the poem was put in the shape of a woman. Now, at the first women's Black Expo,
Black Women's Expo.
Black Women's Expo, they had the poem at all the tables rolled up.
Wow.
Yes, and I added one thing that I thought would be unique in the poem. It says, from the differently abled to the able to be different, the by all means, to the by no means, to the in-betweens. Just look at you. Woman, you are some kind of woman.
Oh, I love it.
Yes.
And that's got Maya's style to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I never thought about that.
it does.
But that's a real compliment and a real, I mean, just to think in place of Maya Angelou.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Now tell me, Howard, there was a famous photo exhibit that back in 1973. But you know what I want to talk to you about before that?
Okay. All right.
Let's go back to, I think the year was 1971. You got a telephone call, and the telephone call said, I have in my possession some materials that I found at I don't even know where the guy found it, negatives and all kinds of things that you had lost.
It was prints at my last studio on North Avenue. And there was a guy who got his mother to buy the building. And actually, he wouldn't let me get back in the building. And there were actually a lot of prints. And there were no negatives, thank goodness. And so the gentleman called me, and I can't think of his name. I have him in my phone. And he's been on my mind. I'm going to call him. And he called me, and a friend of his, a young lady who wrote for The Reader, they came to my house and brought all these prints that I had, and he brought them to me.
Was it Dave Mata?
Yes, Dave Mata, yes.
From Wicker Park. Well, that's where the warehouse was, yes.
Yes, and that was a wonderful thing that he did for me. And I
think he said that when he called you, you said, it's like Christmas.
I did, that's what I remember. But that was really a great thing, and I've got to get back in touch with Dave.
Yeah.
Because that was a really wonderful thing that he did.
Yeah, I can imagine losing, you know.
Well, yes, thank goodness there weren't negatives.
Yeah.
Because recently I have gone through my negatives, and I've thought how valuable they are.
Yeah.
And so I purchased a safe, and making sure it's waterproof and fireproof, because you can't put a price tag on
Yes,
those.
that's
The other
right.
thing, even jewelry, you can lose jewelry, you can lose money, you can get some more money, get some more jewelry. But what do people look for after a storm, after a hurricane, after a flood?
Photos.
They look for their photos.
That's right. And that's the thing we spend a lifetime creating. My father always said, you know, spend your lifetime creating memories that are going to make you smile for the rainy days that are sure to come. And the best way to create those memories is through photographs and writings.
And sadly, people have the majority of their photographs as color photographs. Color photographs will fade.
Yeah, faster.
Yeah, they will fade. Black and white properly processed, they can obtain what is considered archival permanency. You see the old photographs from way back.
And you have to wonder things. I remember Mr. Johnson's collection. He had so many photographs from the early 1500s and 1300s.
Yes.
And speaking about photographs and prints, let's go through some of your photographs.
Okay, we'll start off with him.
Oh, Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
What a beautiful photo.
I have photographs of just about the whole staff that I photographed in a staff meeting. This is long after I left.
Yeah.
And I have Herb Nixon, I have Lerone Bennett,
Yeah.
I have, of course, Herb Nixon. I
Bob
have
Johnson.
Linda Johnson in that meeting. So that's a very important photograph. Check these guys out.
Wow, this is vintage.
So
Oh, look at Harold Washington.
I was in his office, and he was just deep in thought.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the other one of him. Oh, where is it? I gotta find that. Where is it? It's gotta be here.
So many beautiful photos.
There's Oprah. And remember, we have to get that photograph of Jesse Jackson.
Yes, that's right. We will. I'll get it to his daughter. Look at Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah, he was here for Golden Boy, and I was fortunate to be able to get a print to him, which he loved. And Walter Payton.
Oh, now this is a famous picture of Walter Payton. Now, wasn't that on the cover?
When he passed away, the Sun-Times used this photo on the whole cover of the Sun-Times.
Wow.
I've never seen that done before.
I think about singers today who, in this digital revolution, talk about how they just are treated so unfairly because they don't get the royalties that they deserve. A photograph like that, when you get up, did they ask your permission to use it? Did you wake up and just see it in the newspaper?
I woke up and saw it, because this was years after I left the paper.
Sure.
But his son, because I gave Walter a 16 by 20 of this and other prints of this. A great guy, I really liked him. So his son gave it to the Sun-Times, and actually that was an honor.
Yeah, I believe it. But royalties for photographers, I mean, don't you get paid for the use of that
There
photo?
have been, or there has been a change in the way photographers are given ownership of their work with different publications. And unless you have signed a contract giving whatever publication that you work for, you actually have ownership of all your images. So that's something that's recent.
Yeah.
So if you want to go to court, you can do it. But,
that's beautiful.
Let me show you.
Hey, I remember this photo. That's a famous Coca-Cola ad, right?
That was a billboard, and I did win an award for that.
I remember that.
Where is our Harold Washington photograph? Hold on a minute. Yeah, Harold.
I think he was back here. I remember seeing his beautiful smile.
What happened to it? Yeah. That's the thing about digital. But
look at these beautiful. Look at that. This is a beautiful picture here.
Yeah, the kids at Cabrini Green.
Oh my goodness.
One thing that has changed with what's going on with our society. I used to walk around and go around the hood with my cameras and shoot. Can't do that anymore.
They'll take it from you.
They will take it from you and take you from you.
And take you from your camera. That's right.
Whereas, what happened to... See, sometimes something will happen and your images will die. But oh, there he is.
Oh, look at that. There's no smile like Harold Washington's smile. And
he
you
was
captured
just laughing. He was laughing at something, and I grabbed.
he
got
gets
that shot.
tickled.
Yes.
That is a great photo, and it's black and white with all the rich shadows.
Yes. I love black and white.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
When you saw this earlier, I have to tell the world this one. She found an element in this photograph that I really love. It's a photograph that I saw the image, which I call a canvas, the background, and I really liked the background. This is on the west side.
What year was that, or how long ago?
It was during a parade, and I was walking down Central, south of the lake. I saw the background, and I'll call it the canvas. And I said, I need an element. And I waited, and the guy on the bicycle came by, and it was the perfect element. I've seen this thing for years. She saw it, and immediately she said, look, there's an African American flag. I mean, small.
Tiny,
right up there. And I had never seen it. And I printed this thing 1,000 times.
Wow.
But it's such a nice
beautiful.
element.
It is.
It's such a nice element.
Oh my goodness, I love the monochromatic of this, the red that just pops.
And with the railing, this is stairway going down to the Grand subway, CTA subway. But that's the thing about photography. There are many elements to it.
Oh, beautiful. Look at all the different colors of those newsstands.
I'm just so fortunate to have found photography.
Yes.
And I'm just appreciative of fate that photography found me. And we were getting ready to talk about my guys. Bob Black, Obie Carter, John White, myself.
Yes.
And I always say that these guys keep me humble. They are just superb photographers. And I can't get a big head because you have to see their work. Well, Obie and John have won Pulitzers.
Yeah.
And their work is just wonderful. So what happened, and I didn't realize it was such a short time after I came to Chicago and worked with the Sun-Times, that we put together an exhibit, Through Eyes of Blackness.
Yes, yes.
And we had prints from, I think the smallest prints were probably 16 by 20, and the largest was 40 by 60, and mounted on fiberboard. And I owe a lot to the former president, or he's passed away, of Parker House Sausage, Darrell Grisham.
God rest his soul.
Yes, and he really helped us, and I was able to get help from Kodak and Gamma Photo Labs. And so it was a wonderful exhibit, and we worked so hard on that. We did all the prints up to 20 by 24 ourselves.
And how, was it just the three of you?
It was the four of us.
Four of you?
Yes.
And this was 1973?
73.
Yeah.
And the unique thing about the exhibit, which had, I think maybe 50, 60 prints, was that in the display, we had no names on any of the photographs, and they were integrated. So it made the exhibit very unique, so that all of our photographs complemented each other. And I don't, well, maybe it's happened, I don't know of an exhibit where photographers or artists would put their work all together and not have any kind of indication of who shot what. And it was a wonderful exhibit. It went to Wingspread in Wisconsin. It was exhibited at the Sun-Times. That was the first time the Sun-Times had an exhibit of their photographers.
Really?
Because the Sun-Times, and John White was at the Daily News, and Obie was at the Tribune, and Bob, of course, at the Sun-Times too. And we want to do it again.
Well, that was a time when they valued photographers. I mean, now they're firing photographers left and right in droves, in groups. Was this exhibit dismantled? Where is it today?
We had packed it away, and we think it said push under the stage. We don't really know.
Oh, no.
Yes, so.
Well, I tell you what, when we get Reverend Jackson that picture, we need to have them pull out a couple of boards and see if that exhibit is underneath there.
Yes. Today, this now is used so much for photography.
The phone. Yeah,
and it's doing a wonderful job. The cell phones are doing so much, and now it's doing a lot of things that Photoshop does. And so I don't know what the future is.
Well, I mean, I think about those days, almost any artist who's anybody came through the Chicago South Side Community Arts Center, yourself included.
Yes.
Maybe that's one of the places that will start to take the iPhone and its capabilities to another level with artists.
Well, the thing about taking photographs with your iPhone is you lose the technical aspects of shooting. You don't know anything about depth of field. You don't know anything about aperture, shutter speed, and how they relate. You don't know anything about, there's something called the shim-flug. Shim-flug, and that's what you do with a view camera, and how when you tilt your lens and your back, and they all correspond to the point together, then you can actually focus on infinity. And things such as that, and understanding the focus 1/3 of the way into your subject, and you can get the maximum depth of field, aperture that you shoot. Just basic things like that, and understanding contrast, and what lens to use for maximum depth of field, even knowing though that even supposedly you attain maximum depth of field, you're not supposed to make, let me go back. Supposedly you do not get, it doesn't matter whether you use telephoto and wide angle. Technically, supposedly the wide angle lens gives you more depth of field than a telephoto, but in practice, it doesn't apply in reality.
Really?
Yeah,
so it's really like knowing where, like when you mention infinity, I think about the infinity pools, and there's that line. where two things meet. Is that what you're talking about?
No, when infinity is focusing until everything is as far as you can see. Infinity. And supposedly, a wide angle gives you more depth of field than a telephoto. In practice, it doesn't work.
But it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
And that's the thing about shooting and understanding certain things. Just chromatic aberration in your lens, just things like that.
Yeah.
So when you're shooting with the camera, it just makes a difference in knowing what to do and understanding what happens when you do use telephoto lens and you get what's called compression. And so you will use a certain lens for certain reasons, and even if you get distortion. And sometimes when you break the rules and you know what the rules are, then you get repeatability. But if something happens by accident and you don't know why it happened, then you can't get repeatability.
That's right, right. But it takes a lot of play time, I guess.
Yeah, so that's the only thing. You should take your phone and you shoot, and you say, oh, that's really nice. And something happened weird, but you don't know why the weird happened.
Right.
So,
and that's one of the reasons why I love my phone, but I have spent money on some serious cameras that I do not know how to use, but I've told myself these are things I love, and the day will come when I have more time to learn to use them.
Yes.
And I intend to.
I'm going to interrupt right here because I thought about something that's important.
Yes.
We lost a wonderful photographer, David Jenkins.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and
Tell us about your experience with
David.
David.
Well, I've known him for years, and the thing, a wonderful photographer, and what happened when I learned about it, I had just been working with my negatives, finding negatives I hadn't seen in years, and discovering negatives like the Walter Payton negatives. I found them, I had lost them for years.
Right.
And then when I learned about David passing, it hit me particularly hard.
Yeah.
And I had tears behind losing him. And I hadn't seen him in years.
Yeah.
In years, I hadn't seen David. And it just shows we're all going to go that way.
We're all going sometime.
Yeah.
We're all going sometime. And as we think about that and wrap up this interview, I think about what's next for Howard Simmons. I mean, you're a photographer. You've ventured out in so many aspects of photography. You're a poet. And I understand you're even a lyricist.
I have done some, but it's Daddy coming on again. I'm not really.
Jack of all trades and master of anyone you choose to be.
Not really, but Vince Color shows up again.
Yeah.
With Vince, I did some jingles for Amoco, and then something for the state of Illinois. And as a matter of fact, Lowell Thompson worked with me on one for the state of Illinois. Love that guy. But here again, my father, I had a fairy tale dad. He was a wonderful father. He got me into model airplanes, the ones that fly.
Yes.
He got me into model trains and the HO gauge trains. When I worked at a barbershop, I would clean up at the barbershop and shine shoes. And he would come down whenever he could muster the time. He would come down and help me clean up. And just a great dad. And for my HO gauge train, those are the small trains, I had the layout. He built some of the buildings out of matchsticks. I had a very talented father. He had Bud Simmons and the Dixie Brownies, which is a musical group, long before I was on the scene. But Dad, I had a fairy tale dad, and that I lost him at the age of 16.
What memories though?
Yeah.
Because clearly they were indelible. They've stayed with you all this time.
Yes.
Howard Simmons, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been a dynamic conversation, letting all of our audience know about your work and your history. You are truly, truly one of our living legends.
Can I end this interview with family?
Yes.
And the Simmons Women's. That's my wife,
Yes.
my daughter Tracy, Christy, and Robin. My daughters have been so successful, and that's my main achievement in life. We have a wonderful family.
Awesome.
I'm so proud of my girls. They've all succeeded in life, all master's degrees, and just wonderful people. I'm so proud of my daughters. That's my achievement.
God bless you. God bless you.
And of course, my wonderful wife.
Your wonderful, beautiful wife, who is very patient, I might add.
Oh, she is. She is. And I tell people, I don't know anyone like her, except there's one person that I know who is like her, and that's her mom, who has passed away. But
God rest her soul,
yes.
Well, thank you again. We appreciate that. This has been Black Muse, where creatives from the worlds of jazz, hip-hop, gospel, politics, sports, fashion, theater, and literature engage in the lively art of conversation. I'm Doris Davenport. Thank you for joining us. We're going to take a few minutes. I want to run through some of those beautiful photos. I mean, there is so much diversity of every kind in these photos, from style to the black and white, the color, the just sheer number of notable people you've interviewed. Let's take a minute and look through these. I'd like to say this was a colorful conversation, but in reality, it was black and white. Why do I say that? Because in black and white photography, you get the richness and the depth and the shadows, and we've taken that journey with Howard Simmons all through his career. I hope it's been a joy for you.